time for another DraftScience video presentation. Alright, now, I know I should just be calm and, well, people are idiots, gotta wait a few million years to, can't, and then even the ones who are supposed to be saying something positive are so fucking stupid. You're just like, why am I doing this? Is there any hope? Can any of you do anything called reasoning or logic? And so I just get angry and I'm just like, fuck, why am I bothering? Why bother? You just can't even do 2 + 2 kind of reasoning. Alright, so anyway, this pot-smoking atheist moronic title. Why don't you just make atheists look like retards? Oh yeah, I have to wear it on my sleeve, I'm a pothead. You can't have your little recreation in private. You're a masturbating atheist. I mean, what the fuck? Anyway, I realize your video was intended as a response to my previous comment regarding the delayed choice quantum eraser experiment. La 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 la. However, your answer did not address the question. Yeah, it did, fuckhead. I made it clear the question is completely uninteresting. I have proven there are no gremlins. Alright, I've done my job. There's no fucking gremlins, okay? I've demonstrated that everything they've said about the 2-slit experiment is bullshit. No gremlins involved. Now, you want me to take some experiment they did where they not only have gremlins, but the gremlins have horns, and the gremlins have magic wands. And you want me to explain why the gremlins couldn't possibly have magic wands, because the gremlins are kind of lazy and, they're not very attentive to detail, they're kind of slobs, and they'd be leaving magic wands all over the place because they're reckless and stupid, so of course gremlins couldn't have magic fucking wands, and then I'll explain why they couldn't have horns. And you're saying I should waste my goddamn time, okay, going over an experiment. First off, there's no fucking video of it on the planet Earth. No one's ever videotaped them doing these stupid fucking experiments, so all I can do is debunk a goddamn drawing. Okay, a drawing with a bunch of devices in it that are the magic device that counted this and the magic device that counted that. How exactly do I debunk the magic device? Okay, I mean, you're just so full of shit. I gave you good goddamn reason to point out that right from the very start the thing is ludicrous and stupid because it's assuming single photons. It's assuming that the photons somehow split in two, so now they have 2 photons going through the double slit. And then that goes into a crystal that splits them 2 again. I gave you all that fucking information, and yet you're sitting there, you didn't tell. Yeah, I did. I addressed your fucking question. It's based on a bunch of assumptions that are ludicrous and idiotic. Then I pointed out that the whole interferometer thing, they don't even understand either. Okay, that they're really measuring how much divergence there is in the light. They're not really measuring the fucking actual wavelength of the light. I've already been over the interferometer. And then what else is in there? There's another. Oh yeah, polarization. I've already explained that their understanding of polarization is nonsense, right? They think that as the light goes through and some of it gets, you can be off a little from center and it still gets through the filter, and they think that's a progressive thing. That it's like 10, then 20, then 30, then 40, then 50. See, they think that's how it works, that half the light gets destroyed here, and it's a nice progressive curve up to here. Well, guess what? The real answer is, it doesn't work that way. That's right. Okay, that's not the way it works. It's not some progressive curve. It destroys a lot more photons at 49 and 48 and 47 degrees than it destroys at 1, 2, and 3 degrees. So there's an inequity in that. And that's what's giving them the stupid, idiotic statistical outcome that says, well, you violated the Bell inequality because it's not 25% instead of it's 35%, or whatever the number is. Because, it doesn't work that right here at 45 degrees is exactly 50-50. It's not 50-50. It's actually 30-20. Yeah. Because it doesn't work the way they think it works. Because nothing works the way they think it works. And I pointed that out by going right to the source, the double slit experiment, pointing out how none of it works the way their story tells. Feynman was so full of shit, he didn't even know it because he never cared to even look into it. He just accepted that this works and that works and they did this and they did that because he heard stories about them. He never actually did the experiment, never actually saw the experiment. Certainly never saw a detector experiment. And he didn't even know that the single slit makes the pattern. I mean, for fuck's sake, he's sitting there drawing a picture. Look, you close one of the slits and it's straight. Yeah, light just goes straight through. When, yeah, any imbecile knows, no, if it's the same size slit as a single slit, the light can't possibly go straight right through. So, I mean, I already pointed out how fucking stupid they are. And you're saying, oh no, go to the really, really stupid. Go to the insanely stupid, where the gremlins are wearing dresses. And explain why gremlins would never wear dresses. See, I just knew I couldn't read this comment without just saying, I mean, why am I doing this? Why am I bothering? Fucking imbecile. Tell me I didn't address your fucking question. Yeah, I addressed it, asshole. Link me to the video of the fucking experiment being conducted, so at least I have some chance, where they point out, well, this is where we do this, and this is where this happens, and this is where the magical happens. Give me a fucking thing I can actually dissect. Something besides a fucking drawing. Shit. So anyway, it's just it's so fucking uninteresting. I mean, it's just so full of shit as an experiment, and you're saying, oh yeah, go debunk it. You have many videos describing the same thing. Yeah, right. Talking to each individual assholes keep showing up. I'd make the video pointing out how the double slit experiment is complete horseshit. And then the assholes show up and say, well, what about the double slit experiment? And I was hoping to find a video, well, fuck you, where you dive a little deeper. How do you dive deeper? Again, it's just so fucking idiotic. The experiment involves a 2-slit, a magic crystal, then it goes into a prism, and then it goes into an interferometer, and then we have all this technology that's supposed to be able to measure the same photon in 2 different locations at the same exact time. I mean, fuck. I should go deeper into that realm of complete bullshit. I've already showed how difficult it is, even like an experiment like Veritasium did the single photon experiment. And I don't think he, I don't know if he actually deliberately, willfully knew what he was doing. But I mean, clearly you have to be so careful because here he is, he's turning up the sensitivity of the photomultiplier, because he can't get the experiment to work. That's the obvious thing. But he's maybe he doesn't even realize what he's doing. That doesn't make any fucking sense. Why does he have to turn the sensitivity way the hell up? Why does he have to do that? It's supposed to be making a pattern. You're supposed to even be able to see it with your eyes. How come he has to turn the detector way the fuck up? Anyway. A little deeper. Okay, so, all right, so that's enough of that crap. Then he says, I agree that modern science has jumped off the deep end and sounds more like a religion. So you're agreeing with the point, and that's the point that should be emphasized, is that all of their foundational assumptions are the ones where you start. You start with the gremlins and the pixies. You don't start with arguments about why pixies don't have watermelons on their head. You don't start with arguments that are so far into their nonsense. You start with the foundation. You want to debunk the gingerbread story, the witch. You just debunk the fact that nobody can make that much gingerbread. There, then we're done. What about rain? And it is impossible to perceive the universe they are trying to paint. Well, it's not. It's clearly possible for people to do it because they're doing it. But the thing is you have to qualify that by saying it's impossible for a rational person to imagine this universe. You can't draw it in your brain. You can't draw any of these functions. The bent space. What do you mean? How does this space contract? How does it do that? Your model makes it very easy to imagine how the forces work without doing mental gymnastics. Well, then why don't we just stop there? Why isn't that good enough, fuckhead? I mean, explain to me why you want me to sit there and waste hours or days or months of my time sitting there analyzing all these obscure experiments made out of complete crap. Fuck. It took me years to understand the mistake Veritasium made in his stupid fucking single photon experiment. This isn't that fucking easy, jackass. God damn it. that said, the reality is that modern physics has not only been broken by their misreading, they didn't misread something, they made up crap. They made up fake experiments, they made up fake results of their mathematics. Somebody drew a drawing 200 years ago and they said, fine, that looks cool. Oh, it doesn't work? Well, who cares? We don't know. Work, smirk. I mean, it's, just like they made up their stupid, 1/2 mv squared nonsense. Just made up crap, doesn't work. All right, and they wrote it into their God book. That should be enough. For me to point out that should be more than enough evidence that fucking conventional physics doesn't know its ass from its elbows, all of that crap. It doesn't know shit. All right, it's full of shit. All right, misreading of the double slit experiment. But much more biased based on the more recent results on the modified experiment. So again, you think the modified experiments are so much more interesting. Well, I'm just telling you as an overt fact, okay? I find them incredibly uninteresting compared to the fundamental experiments. The fundamental experiments seem to be the really interesting experiments, the ones that require you getting to some fundamental, like realizing that a photon has this big giant polarization. Its polarization spans over thousands of atoms worth of space. How exactly does a single electron produce something that huge? That's a good fucking question. It's a question nobody's answered. Those are really important questions. All right, this fucking bullshit about analyzing some experiment with 17 black boxes and 93 crystals in it doesn't seem at all interesting. It's like the electron double slit experiment, right? When you go look at it and see what the fuck it is, right? It's supposed to be an experiment where you shoot things randomly. It's exactly the opposite. The whole experiment is basically focusing electrons into the slit. So it has exactly the opposite fundamental premise. No machine gun scattering bullets. No, the bullets are so perfectly aligned through the whole experiment. Now, those kinds of obvious shenanigans, just glaring. Why are you forcing me to worry about fucking gremlin horns? I am sure you understand your model so well that you can explain what they are doing to cause the interference pattern. So again, you're saying they're causing an interference pattern. No, they're shooting photons. They think they're single photons, but they aren't, because you can't make anything with a single photon. You can't make anything interesting happen. So their premises are all wrong. And yes, what they have are two oppositely polarized photons that come out of their stupid crystal. And when you have two oppositely polarized, oppositely in-phased photons, you can create either they match or they don't match. You can create paths where their phase matches or doesn't match. There's nothing incredibly interesting. Anyway, when adding the additional components of their so-called quantum eraser. So again, you're calling it their so-called. You're already pointing out how blah, blah, blah. And I already pointed out to you how it starts with this insanely silly premise. So without trying to upset you, fuck you. Jesus. Have you ever made any videos in the past that address the additional results of the experiment? Yeah, I've made vague references to it here and there. I've talked about the Allen aspect experiment and the spinning mirror and how he patented nobody else can use it, so the whole experiment can't be repeated because he owns a patent on some fucking spinning mirror bullshit. I mean, there's only so much you can do. Again, what do you want me to dissect? You want me to dissect an experiment done by different people in different ways, and all I'm going to have as evidence is some fucking drawing. I have to dissect a drawing. Shit. Which are leading so many intelligent people to believe the new quantum religion. Yet, frankly, those experiments didn't lead them down that road. They were already on that road, and they're just making those experiments to try to create some sort of confirmation of their bullshit. But again, there's nothing I can do about an assumption that's wrong, right? So if they're going to say polarizing gets deteriorated proportionally, when the facts indicate it doesn't, all right, the three polarizing films sort of prove the point that it doesn't do it proportionally. That in fact you destroy more photons going from here to here than you destroy from here to here. So I'm just saying there's nothing I can do when they have made a declaration of the truth that isn't the truth. And so then they say, oh, Bell's inequality was violated because it's not 50-50. It's not supposed to be 50-50. You have something very awesome. Let's see, and believe it, you have something very awesome. That's really great. If you can explain how this ray particle model can more easily explain the additional nutsy results. So again, I'm supposed to explain what you're calling nutsy results. Shit, there's just no point. You want me to explain how when they say they've created these 400 fake particles, which one do we actually have evidence of, where we get to see the evidence? The positron? Okay, well, the evidence for the positron is something went through a piece of lead, okay, popped out and spun down as if it was a positive particle. And they said, right, the first 17, well, let's say the first 6 people who saw that didn't call it a positron. They said it was a proton going fast or going slow, one of the two. And then one guy said, I'll call it a positron. And so that's how the positron was invented. So what do you want me to do? What do you want me to say? You want me to say, oh, God, they got really great evidence and everybody should believe? No. Everybody should say, wait a minute, is that all the evidence you're using to draw these conclusions about the existence of some particle that doesn't fit anywhere, that you can't put anywhere, doesn't fit in the atom anywhere? Where are all these positrons all over the place? Where the fuck are they hiding? What sense does their theory make? They don't even place any of these objects in an atom. I just showed you the stupid Sabine Hassenfelder. She ended her video by saying, well, look, we know that everything is made out of just these electrons and protons. Yo, fuck. Oh, no, that's not your standard model. I mean, fuck. I just don't know what to say. If you're the hope of correcting with a problem, there's no hope, because this mush. I mean, this. Oh, you're awesome, but until you explain where all the unicorn horns are. You don't have an argument as far as I'm concerned. Let's see. Their experiment, it will make it even easier to wake people up. I really don't think so. I've proven that they don't even pay attention to the double slit experiment. The physicists don't even have the details right. Simple details like whether detector experiments could even be done. But I mean, they don't even know there's a pattern with a single slit. Or they don't even know that the double slit has the 2 patterns, 2 patterns, 2, 2, 2, 2, 2, 2. They don't even know that. They don't even know the 2 pattern part. So, what the fuck are you talking about? Oh, yeah. If I go into a whole bunch of convoluted details about every single aspect of the interferometer and every aspect of how they're detecting and every aspect, all these details, that somebody's going to pay attention to all those details? I mean, are you fucking that insane? Again, somebody like Veritasium couldn't even pay attention to the detail. How come I have a photo detector that's getting 7 error photons a second? How come? I mean, that seems kind of shitty. It's 2017 or whatever year it was. I can't have a photo detector that does better than that? Yeah, you can. Alright, anyway. If you could explain, okay, blah, 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 creating their experiment, it will make it even easier to wake people up, right? So that's what you think the problem is. I haven't gone into enough detail on insanely complicated experiments. Oh, okay. Thanks again, and keep up the awesome work. I used awesome again. Yuck. I will keep watching. Does it matter, though? Does it really matter? So really, look, the point is I probably shouldn't interact with the audience because, you're all kind of irrelevant. I have to get a physicist to tear down. I have to show them to be the fakes and the phonies that they are. I have to be able to show just how ignorant they are of these foundational experiments and these foundational concepts and how the notions they have in their head don't make any sense. Let them explain how the polarization of a photon can be thousands of atoms. how a single electron did that. Single tiny electron inside of an atom, right? An electron that's thousands of times, realistically, millions of times smaller than the atom. Somehow that little thing inside that atom created something 1,000 atoms big. How's that realistic? Those are the questions that need answering. The questions that don't need answering is the silly results of they got to their silly experiment that is so convoluted nobody could really follow along. Alright, so I'm going to delete this because it pissed me off. That's a good reason to delete it. I answered your fucking question, shithead. You don't like the answer, fine. I answered it, though. Oh, this is some Ken Wheeler kook. There's no argument in your argument. Yeah, sure there isn't. Fucking idiots. Alright, so what I was thinking of doing was going back to a Miles Mathis. Pile of shit. The double slit. So his most recent article, he's talking about the epistemology of his physics. And it goes into a whole spiel about how you have to love nature, and if you don't love nature, nature won't show you the truth. So it's like real Ken Wheeler-esque kind of horseshit. Kind of amazing. Just such baby talk. You're just like, whoa. Whoa. What a stinker. So anyway, that got me to his so then he did a little spiel on the Veritasium experiment, the single photon one. And no, it wasn't the single photon, it was the pilot wave one. But anyway, so it's a Veritasium video. And he was debunking that, and all the debunk was he's a Jew. Okay, so the whole debunk of Veritasium's video was he's a Jew. So that was hilarious. Anyway, and then that led me to the double slit one, and it's just such a pile of crap that I figure I'll read some of it, but it's just the same old crap. I mean, you're going to go to explain the experiment, and you don't even talk about the fact of what the patterns are and what actually works, what the experiment actually produces. And it's just like, and what photons, you have to have some recognition of what a photon is. The wavelength is important, but the wavelength is proportional to the polarization, which is really important here, is in terms of figuring out what's happening to something as it's passing through obstructions. How big something is really important if you're saying, how does it get through an obstruction? It's going to give you some information at minimum. And just the fact that you can do this experiment, you can do it different ways and with different materials and different things, and they've never taken the time to really analyze what the exact effects are of changing things just a little, making the slit material wider or thicker, doing different little things. There's no analysis by all of physics of this foundational experiment. And it is so bad that here we have this same old stupid drawing. We have two waves coming out of the two slits, and the point source for the math, if you're going to do it, would be the center of the slits. Obviously, that's not the math they use. So why are you drawing the waves there when the waves can't be coming from there? Because those aren't the point sources you use in your math. The distance you use in your math is the two interior surfaces. They don't even count the exterior ones. It's so funny. It's so bad. So they're not even conceding the existence of the two patterns. Which makes the whole thing more of a joke. And as I've explained, the way they get around it is to annihilate the existence of the significance of the single impediment by making it smaller than a single wavelength, or they make the slit openings smaller than a single wavelength. I mean, these are insanely small. Nobody does the experiment that way, but if you do it that way, yes, you'll turn a double slit into a single slit, because you basically said the two sources are so close to each other that they can't mathematically make a significant difference. Anyway, I've been through all that crap. But it's the same rotten drawing, the same pile of crap that has nothing to do with the truth. The only math that works for the double slit has four sources on each one of the surfaces. That math will get you the right complex pattern. And that's how it has to be seen. The single slit is the two surface experiment. The single impediment is the two surface experiment. That's why the patterns are very much alike. except for the center maxima not being as bright. Obviously, if you have an opening, it's going to be brighter than if you have an impediment right in the middle. Yeah, duh. But the pattern will be exactly in the same positions. The fringes will be in the same places. They'll just have a different intensity. So the single slit and the single impediment are the same experiment essentially, and then the double slit, it's really the 4-source experiment. So the other experiments are the 2-source. If double slit is the 4-source, and if you add another slit, then that's going to be the 6-source, and then the 8-source, and on and on and on it goes. All right. So there's no acknowledgement in his paper of the fact that the single slit and the double slit both create patterns. Okay, so let's just be clear. So what I really wanted to do was just go into some of this, what the hell is a photon crap, because that's what the debate is really. You got to come down to is we know the photon has certain features. Okay, so the one we can all agree on, okay, whether it's a wave or it's a particle, is that it has a frequency built into it. Okay, and the frequency means it has to be a timed event. I mean, realistically. See, it doesn't have to be, but I'm just saying it just makes sense that you wouldn't say the frequency is the object, because clearly these objects can be so far away from each other. I mean, a 10-mile radio wave or something. I mean, do you really think there's a, as a particle, that's really unrealistic. A particle that's 10 miles long. I mean, that doesn't make any sense. Come on. And even the idea of a wave, like the wave is 10 miles of doing this. No. It's 10 miles between this, this part, and the next peak. The peak and the peak are 10 miles apart. The on part, and then there's the nothing, and then there's the on part. So I mean, it's a frequency. So it's something that has to be produced over time, and it's something that has to be collected over time. You're collecting the frequency. You're not collecting the photon, so to speak. You're collecting this event. Something hits, and then at a specific time something hits, and then at a specific time something hits, something happens, whether you call it a wave front or wave front. You have to think of it in that terms, and that the only way it could receive it is there has to be at least 2 components to it. There has to be, for there to be a frequency. It's a timed event. It's like tipping something over. You got to hit it, and then it comes back, and then you hit it again, or you hit it while it's still moving. You hit it again. So you hit it, it moves, and then you hit it again before it tips back, and then you could tip it over. I mean, that logic fits so well. So it's like, oh yeah, come on, that's got to be part of this equation. You got to know that. And then the other trick is this idea of polarization. And we know antennas create polarization in the radio world, and you just make the antenna smaller as your wavelength goes up. So I mean, as your frequency goes higher, you just make, it means there's less time between events. Less time between events is, your antenna can only be this high because the next event has to start. So you run out of time. And the light's doing the same thing. It's just a very tiny little antenna. And it's creating a polarized event. So the event not only has a frequency, okay, this way, over time, it has a polarization this way, okay, that makes it, it has to hit 2 places to create a photon. One thing has to hit in one location. Some event's going to happen where the timing's going to be that this event and this event will meet here and create a third event that means there'll be electricity and we'll say a photon hit. So it's more complicated. It's not just this idea that you just say photon is. There's real questions here, and there hasn't been any conversation by any physicist about what the hell a photon is. What the hell? You can't just draw this and say, there, I drew a photon. Okay, there was a thing, a Feynman diagram, and I drew a photon, and it popped out and went wherever it was going. Blah 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 blah. Because we, like I said, we know the electrons that are banging into each other, or the events that are taking place to create this thing, can't possibly create this thing, because this thing has to be gigantic. Alright, anyway, I've already been over that part. So what's the other part I wanted to go over? So you have frequency, and then you have polarization, and you have the fact that it's, you know, because of the frequency, it's a timed event. So it hits, and then it has to hit again in the right order, in the right place, for there to be what we call it a photon. And the, you know, the idea is the polarizing filter is actually this way. So the photon's polarization is this way. You know, it's out of alignment in this direction, and the way it goes through is not because, you know, the bars are the same direction as the polarization. So if this was the first event up here and the second event was down here, and that was moving through space, you know, like on that kind of angle, I could do it that way, right? The first event is up there, the, you know, down here, and the second event, and they're coming towards you. You're not putting it through a grating that's going in the same direction as that distance. It's exactly the opposite. So it seems like it should be blocking, but obviously the argument would be is no, the polarization is fitting inside of this, and these bars mean that it'll tip it up or tip it down a little bit. So if I was to draw the bars this way, you know, and the photon was going through, it could be deflected a little bit up, and this one could be deflected a little bit down, but at least they're now still in the same plane. So there's a possibility that when you tip this one down, there was one over here that you tipped up, and those two could meet and be back in phase, right? But if I tilt it that way and that way, if I bend the polarization, you know, if the bars are this way, then it's going to tilt, you know, if the bars are this way, then it's going to make the photon go that way or that way, and there's no way those two are going to find each other. So if you move them this way and that way, they can find each other. If you move them that left and right, they're not going to find each other. They're never going to be able to meet up somewhere. So that's why this inverse, non-intuitive, the fact that the direction that makes it possible for the polarization to go through is exactly the opposite. The bars are sideways to the frisbee, and the frisbee goes through the bars that are sideways. So, you know, the frisbee analogy doesn't really work, because the real concept is more just about deflecting photons, deflecting the pieces of energy. So it's just another complication, another aspect. Now we have the aspect of how is the damn thing created, right? So I'm arguing that, you know, there's electrons and atoms. The electrons are on the surface, and electrons by electricity are moved. That is, the atom goes from, say, this shape to this shape. Okay, that's what electricity is doing. And when that happens, this electron pops out. Okay, and when it does that, when it moves quickly, what it's doing is hitting all the energy that's coming in at it. Okay, and it hits that energy and reflects it. So when it moves out, it's reflecting energy. Now, to move out means there has to be a whole bunch of energy that gets squished. So that means two electrons had to get too close to each other and push out. So the idea would be, as electrons constantly dislike each other because there's a force between them bouncing back and forth like a ping pong ball. And if I push them into each other, the ping pong ball bounces a lot, makes a lot of reflections, and pushes them rather quickly away. Okay, and eventually that energy collects, okay, with the electron as the electron moves out. So there's more than one of them in there, and so essentially when it pushes out, it has a couple of them pushing it. So there's a little couple of force bits that are pushing this thing, like a little gamma ray. They're really close to each other because you push them really close together. So you made a gamma ray. See, a gamma ray would be very small frequency. Ultraviolet might be bigger, and then infrared is even bigger frequency. And so that's how you're making light, by just compressing and relaxing. So as this plows into the field of energy coming this way, it's going to start reflecting it. And it's going to, as it's reflecting it, it's going to lose this stuff. So at the same rate it's compressing this field, it's expanding these reflections. These reflections now are really close together, and they're going to leave spaced much further apart. And the ones that are coming in this way are going to go from this to this. They're going to end up getting compressed and then move as a reflection. So as the electron moves, it compresses whatever's in the space, just as my hand would come, if I could move my hand the speed of light, you could understand it would collect all the reflecting photons on the surface of my hand, and then my hand stops, it would release all of them, and they'd all fly at you at once. So I'd collect a whole bunch of reflections, and then pow, all of it goes right to you. And the same thing is happening in space when electrons move. When electrons move fast, they compress the energy. So this is what the field was doing. It had a bunch of infrared radiation in it, and it converted the infrared into visible light by compressing it. And so now this is a little clump of compression. But the trick is that's not a photon, because this stuff in here doesn't necessarily have the right frequency. All right. What's going to create the photon is another electron down here. Say electricity is traveling, and an atom down here is going to do the same thing. Okay, it's going to pop an electron, and when it pops the electron, it's going to be a timed event. The electricity took a certain amount of time to go down here. Now it's going to create another one of those little clumps. So the little clump has clumps inside of it, and that's the photon. The photon is this pair, this pair, this pair, and this pair. So every time I create one photon, I'm really creating 2 or 3 or 10 or 12, because they're all inside this compression. This is the distance of the frequency, not the little bits inside. This is. And those pairs are going to hit different places, and they're going to cause timed events in the matter, and those timed events are going to recreate the electricity. And that's how we'll know there was a photon. So I'm just saying this example, so if you understood that this might have something to do with the real physics, you could understand why you can't create a single photon. All you can do is create a group of photons at a time, a clump of photons, 10 photons, or 100 photons. We don't know how many, but that's how you have more than one in the experiment at a time. And then there's the whole point of even if you could cause one of these events, I mean, how little electricity would it take to cause one photonic event? I mean, it's a tiny, tiny amount of electricity, and you'd have no idea which way the photon was going. So, the idea of having one photon in an experiment is really kind of not a very realistic expectation, is what the argument could be. You don't have to believe all this, just to recognize that if you're producing it with electricity, it's a tiny wattage. I mean, a single photon is 0.0000 something 8 watts or something. I mean, it's a tiny, 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 tiny amount. So how exactly do I do that? How do I create single photons coming off a surface? And if I try to block photons, see, that's the other trick, right? If I try to put a screen in, I have a bright light with lots of photons going through, and then I put a screen in front of it, something to block it. That's supposed to not let photons through. Well, the trick is if it's letting some photons through, that means there must be holes in it. Okay, so if I put little holes in it in certain places, certain places where it's less dense and the photon can get through, well, haven't I just created a slit then? And aren't I now just going to end up making photons that come out in all kinds of directions in pieces again? Aren't I just breaking the photon? So now I'm making a bunch of little pieces. Okay, I'm taking the photon like this, and I'm sending one bit this way, and I'm sending one bit that way, and I'm sending one bit, this way. So they're all going different places, these different little pieces. And then here on the screen, what I'm going to be able to do is, it's a 50-50 thing, whether they'll be in phase or out of phase. So the bits are all going to land from different path lengths, and it's just a 50-50 chance of being almost in phase or almost out of phase. Putting them back in phase is going to be 50-50. 50% no phase, out of phase, 50% in phase. Well, it's really going to be 60-40 or some other number like that now, because they can be a little bit out of phase. They don't have to be exactly 500 nanometers. They could be 480, 520, and that'll add up to still a photon that's 510. But whatever. But you can see there's much more to these mechanics. They don't give you any of this. They don't give you a single clue what a photon is. Nothing. They just draw this stupid squiggle and say photon. And they call that physics. Just like they just say bent space constant vacuum cleaner sucking mechanism, and that's it. Vacuum cleaner sucks space. That's it. Nothing. There's no explanation. So the very fact that I have to even point this out, that they give you absolutely nothing. Their physics has no explanation for any of this stuff. They can't even describe the patterns correctly, right? And obviously, if you watch my 2-slit video, I explain exactly why these patterns come out the way they do. I mean, it's in here. It's in the scatter argument. But anyway. Yeah. So it's, So the important feature is they are not doing anything as a foundation. They've given you nothing rational as a foundation. They're just telling you there's pixies, there's gremlins, there's these different creatures in existence, and then they're telling all kinds of bizarre stories about what their behaviors are and what they do in the world and how many socks they steal and all this other stuff. But you have to understand it's wrong from the beginning. Okay? Just like it's wrong to sit there and say, well, I reject the Christian God, but I believe in Thor. Huh? Why? The point is they have nothing. They've created no foundation for you to understand because they haven't even accounted for the actual function of a photon. They haven't even accounted for the fact that it has this giant polarization, that they've never accounted for it. I mean, those are huge omissions. And that's where your attention should be. Your attention should be on the fact that, when I played Richard Feynman's video now at least 4 or 5 times, and every time pointed out these glaring errors. I mean, glaring nonsense. Close one of the slits and it just goes straight through. Complete nonsense. Never happened. Then he talks about detectors. Never. Nobody ever tried to detect a photon passively. It would be a retarded event. No one would be stupid enough. And then to even make detectors small enough. It's just a ludicrous proposition. Ludicrous. And here it's part of the storytelling. I mean, how bad does it have to get? I mean, how completely fallacious and nonsensical. And then people, in Miles Mathis's video, commentary, he's sitting there how Feynman has mathematics. No, Feynman didn't do any mathematics. He had no mathematics for the double slit experiment. He had an idea of an explanation for this randomness. But the mathematics he was relying on is the same nonsense, the same double slit Young experiment that doesn't get the right answer, that doesn't tell you where it actually is. Feynman never said, well, you have to use the 4 surface math. That's not Feynman. So anyway. So I'll read a little bit of this. It's long. I can't, what's the point? I'll just extrapolate to what his theory is. But just the way the paper starts is just, in my opinion, funny. That's all. In this paper, I will show the simple mechanical solution to the famous double-slit experiment, or 2-slit experiment. Feynman called this the most important experiment for understanding quantum motion, and he may have been right. So, obviously, this was the origin of the invention of the magical answers, okay, because they assumed what the pattern was. It's the simplest pattern in the universe, on and off, and they made us jump to say every time there's an on and off pattern, it has to be interference. No, it doesn't. Every circular object is in one location. It's at the top. Lots of things create frequencies. Lots of things create patterns, and it doesn't have to involve anything interfering with something else. All right. Anyway, and the most difficult problems are always the most important, and this one has remained unsolved up to this minute. So he's claiming he's solving it, which is a joke. Thomas Young first performed it in 1801. So the real truth is Newton performed all of this. Newton did the 2 outsides, surfaces facing out, and he did the surfaces facing in experiments. And he already showed, okay, that's Newton's rings. He showed that there's this pattern created, that you get fringes. So it's all Young did was do what Newton had done, and he just did it. He put the single hair experiment that Newton had done, and he put it inside the single slit that Newton had done. It's like just putting a hair inside an aperture, and now you have a double slit experiment. So it was already a well-established phenomenon, and that's the joke of this whole thing, that somebody all of a sudden thinks, this was a new phenomenon. No, the fringes were already a known fact in 1650 or whatever the hell it was. Which means it has been a mystery for over 200 years, 350. Even Feynman failed to solve it well in his own brain. He offered a mathematical solution only. He didn't even offer a mathematical solution. He offered an explanation for the fact that you could do some probability math and get close to a right answer. It's not the right answer though, right? So I mean, the vector probability math doesn't get the right answer unless you use the right number of sources. All right. So he didn't offer math. Let's just be clear. He didn't have accurate math. He had a concept that I don't believe in waves, so therefore it's not wave interference, so I'm going to say there's a random God. That was Feynman's answer. He clearly says it right to the camera, okay? Where he explains how there's this proposition that you have the same conditions, you get the same outcome. He said, no, you don't do that, okay? There's a random God that screws everything up, so you can never have the same conditions. But was not able to provide a physical solution. Well, he wasn't able to draw it right to save his life, that's clear. I will solve the two biggest problems here. So this is his definition of the problems. The problem of the single photon. Well, I don't remember you saying anything about that, actually. And the problem of the detector. So the joke is that he's going to explain the detector results, which are also just fallacious. There is no detector experiment. Nobody ever detected a photon or an electron. No one did a detector experiment. It didn't happen. Okay. In the first problem, we let the photons go through the experiment one at a time. So again, this is an assumption made by people that there are such a thing as a whole photon, okay, one at a time. Yeah, you can get pieces in the environment, but you can never, there's no whole photon producer, single photon at a time production. And like I said, if you use an opaque screen, you have to understand that, oh yeah, I just broke all the photons into little pieces, and now there'll be places where the pieces can be put back together. Using the photon as particle theory that Einstein proved and Feynman confirmed. Well, Feynman obviously was not a fan of he didn't believe you could explain photons as waves. He said the thing don't work that way, to quote him. We expect no wave interference since the photon must go through one slit or the other. So again, this whole argument that it goes through one slit or the other, no, the fact is you have to have more than one photon in the experiment because the surfaces can't break one photon. One photon's too small. Even though it has big polarization, it's not bigger than a slit that's, could be 500 wavelengths in width. You're not going to break that photon as a single photon. So that won't work. You need more than one photon to interact with more than one surface to create the pieces necessary to create the pattern. That's why Veritasium couldn't get the experiment to work as a single photon experiment, and he had to speed it all up. So instead of doing it slowly over a whole day, he had to do it in 5 minutes. Because if he didn't do that, he couldn't get enough pieces to make a pattern. But we see the interference. The single photon seems to be interfering with itself in some strange way. Well, it only seems that way because that's the story they told us. So because they told us a Three Little Pigs story, we're kind of stuck with pigs. And now if you try to imagine it as the Three Little Flea story, or the Three Little Banana story, or the Three Little platypus story, it just doesn't work as well because you're used to pigs. So once they tell you something, you get stuck in your head and you think that's the way it works, when no, it doesn't really have anything to do with how it works. The right answer isn't going to be three pigs. Okay, up till now there have been several proposed solutions. Wikipedia lists the most important. The first they mention is the wavefront. Well, the fact is, the first thing they should mention is the math of two waves doesn't work. It won't get you the right answer, ever. Nobody even uses no one uses the distance between the center of the slit and the center of the slit because it doesn't work. So clearly that should be the first statement, is that two waves don't work. It can't be two photons interfering with themselves. It can't be a single photon interfering with itself. It doesn't work. It doesn't create the right pattern. So it has to be a single photon that breaks into four photons, four wave functions, and those four wave functions interfere. That's the only way that works. Let's just understand. Of the photon go through both slits and interferes with itself. Since the wave front is still not defined mechanically, this solution is not very compelling. Yeah, so well, your counter argument isn't saying much either. All right, to say it's not compelling isn't explaining why it's wrong, but whatever. The wave front is and always has been defined using Huygens visualization. Well, again, and the Huygens principle is insane in the sense that for it to be realistically an answer, it has to be creating an infinite number of little waves, because somehow the wave doesn't get rounder and rounder as it goes through space. So that doesn't really work for it to create straight line waves as a response, or perfectly curved waves. It has to create an infinite number of these little wavelets. So the whole thing is nonsense. All right, and clearly there's no reason for a wave to break in the center, right? And that's what you're really saying. In the single slit experiment, the only way to explain the two photons is to say somehow two waves were created. So one wave goes in and somehow the single slit makes two waves. Well, why would it do that? They don't have any explanation for that. The wave is seen as a semicircular forward transmission from every point on a line of the moving photons. Right, and that won't get you the right answer. The point sources have to be the surfaces. If they aren't the surfaces, you're not going to get the right answer. With a single photon, this would be a semicircle in front of the photon, but we are never told how far this semicircle extends. Well, obviously the distance between the source and the slits is always indicated to be a long distance, so the arc of the line of the wave would be very flat, so that really wouldn't be an issue. What it's composed of or how it acts upon the field, yes, we're not getting anything rational, right? Again, Feynman concedes there's no such thing as this stupid wavy photony thing, so he knows it's a discrete bit, so why is he even talking about the possibility of it going through both slits? Why is that even reasonable? So we will let this explanation pass as wholly unsatisfactory. Well, again, he didn't say much about it. Another solution is to define the photon as a probability. A discrete particle cannot go through both slits at once, but a particle as a probability can. Says you. Well, anyway, so that one's ludicrous right on its face. That's one you could just say, well, that's just so damn silly that why should I even bother? How does the photon know there's a slit coming? I have to split into two and go through both slits, even though the slits are so far away. I'm a little tiny photon. Okay, I'm a couple of thousand atoms at the most big, and I'm heading for something that's gigantic, you know, millions of atoms across. How the hell am I going to split into two and know? How do I know all that stuff ahead of time? I have to split in two long before I get to the slit, right? Or I'm not going to have any. I'm just going to plow right into the middle. It's just such a nonsense. As face, it's nonsense. All right. Anyway, the third and currently accepted explanation is the extension of the second one. Feynman proposed that photon is a probability traveling every possible path, which is just more baby talk, and therefore through both slits, and each path is given an equation, and we sum over all the equations. And again, that won't get you the right answer. The only place the fringes are being created is the surface photons. The photons that go near the surface. How many photons go near the surface? Now, obviously, if I make a slit narrower, 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 it's more and more likely that the photon is going to go near the surface, and therefore it's going to be a fringe. So if I want to make the more fringe, I just make the slit smaller, and that way the photon is guaranteed to go by the surface, and therefore guaranteed to be a fringe. But if I don't want too many fringes, then I make it wider, and then the fringes become less and less relevant. But it's only a tiny, 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 minuscule percentage, a big circle, only a minuscule percentage of the photons will go anywhere near the surface, and 99.9999999% will not. And therefore, I'm not going to be able to see the pattern because it's going to be made out of so few photons as a percentage of the light. Anyway, now admittedly, this is a clever mathematical solution. So it's not clever because it doesn't get the right answer. So let's just keep saying that over and over again. Show me Feynman predicting the location of the fringes. He never does it. All right, Feynman was a master of clever mathematical solutions. He was a master of generalizations that don't bother about details like getting the right answer. And this is one of his best. Mathematically, it works, says you. So show me the math working. Show me the sums over all possible locations math actually gets the right answer. Because guess what? That's a sum over the center of the slits. See, if you sum over all the possibles, what all you're basically doing is turning the point source back into the center of the slit. The center of the slit will give you the wrong answer. So it doesn't work. All right. But it's not a physical or mechanical solution. It's a mathematical solution. So it's not even a mathematical solution that gets the right answer. So I don't even know if you can call it a mathematical solution when it gets the wrong answer. That should be called something other than a mathematical solution. Feynman was not so much a physicist as he was a mathematician, and he invaded the physics department. Well, it is true that his physics sucks. Anyway. In his own way, Feynman admitted this. He did not admit being an invader, but admitted that his solution was only mathematical. Well, and he just said, shut up and calculate is his famous terminology. Don't bother thinking about it. Don't bother trying to explain it because I'm Feynman, I'm brilliant, I can't figure it out, so you can't figure it out. Yes, he was an arrogant shit. Anyway. He knew as well as anyone that it wasn't physical by the old definition of physics. Yes, it's not a physical explanation. It's a magical explanation, and it's a God of the gaps pile of shit. The random God did it. It's a God answer. I mean, it clearly is saying the universe is random. Bullshit. He certainly didn't prove that. He got around this by claiming that the new physics was and must be mathematical only. Well, it's not even, again, the math doesn't even make any sense. So clearly math doesn't fix the fact that he doesn't even know what the pattern looks like. You know, you're not going to fix the fact that he doesn't understand how slits work at all. He'd never even accounted for the single slit making the same pattern. I mean, the same fringe pattern. Okay, it's not exactly the same location for the fringes, but it's making fringes. The fact that he didn't even concede that the single slit produces fringes, is pretty glaring. Since there was no possible mechanical solution. So obviously there's a solution, there is an answer, and nobody wished to go look for a rational solution. Instead, everybody's going for some wacky, spinny, swirly bullshit solution. He was wrong, as I will prove very quickly. Yes, his math works precisely, so no, it doesn't, because there is a physical reality underlying his probabilities. There's a physical reality, and again, the probabilities are just 50-50. It's just a 50-50 equation. It's all it is, right? You either are back in phase or you're not in phase. You're back in phase, you're out of phase. You're in phase, you're out of phase. That's all it is. So it's a 50-50 equation. And scatter provides you the heads and the tails, and all you're doing is putting heads, tails, tails. You're just putting heads and tails together. Probabilities are not the causes the cause of themselves. It is illogical, even as a piece of mathematics, to propose that probabilities are spontaneously generated or that they are primary generators. Yes, the whole idea of a random God is silly. No, they must be generated by a real field. Well, no, they have to be generated by a real circumstance. The word field is kind of mushy. Even in pure mathematics, probabilities are always secondary numbers produced by an underlying field of numbers. It's not even produced by an underlying field of numbers. It's produced by an underlying field of variables. And the variable is the photon goes through the slit over here, or the photon goes through the slit over here, or it goes through the dead middle. That's your first variable, is where did it go through? And then your second variable is the little pieces got flown all over the place, by going close to the surface. They got scattered by the electrons. And now, where are you going to put together red ones? Well, red ones can only get put together over here in phase. And then the blue ones have to be here. And then, and that's all going to add up perfectly sensible. You're not going to be able to evade those facts. That the path lengths have to fit the color of the light. The frequency. A field of probabilities cannot be a functional field. They therefore cannot take place in a physical field. But let's just understand, the probabilities are not that incredible. All you're really saying is that fewer things bend a whole lot, right? So there's less light the further out you go. And that sort of makes sense. If there's a mechanical cause, it's just telling you that the mechanical cause basically is that it can hit 2 or 3 or 4, but it can't hit 500. So the pattern is going to be limited. And the bigger the bend, the less likely the bend of that much. And so that's the other one that you fit in there. And the rest is just 50-50 math. No complex probability at all. All right. What foundational field of numbers is creating the probabilities in the experiment? The answer is the foundational EM field. In every analysis of this problem and this experiment to date, the analysis have oversimplified the problem. No, they've ignored the real problem, as you sort of are, in the sense that you have to understand the two patterns, and you have to understand what features make the two patterns different. I mean, there's the obvious one is, the difference between a slit, an opening, and an impediment, a block. The difference between this and this. And you get these obvious pattern differences where, oh yeah, it's missing all the bright stuff in the center. The bright stuff in the center all goes away when I'm doing an impediment. And when I'm doing a slit, oh yeah, there's lots of bright stuff in the center. I mean, these are obvious things, where the deduction doesn't have to do anything complicated at all in terms of understanding, oh, there's less light in the experiment if it's an impediment. Oh, yeah, maybe that has something to do with the pattern. Yeah. All right, anyway. Even if you ran the experiment in a vacuum, the walls of the photons as the only objects in the vacuum chamber, you would still not have a void since the walls are still material objects and such, and there must be, yes, well, we agree that it doesn't matter whether you do it in a vacuum or not. I have provided in several previous papers that the charge field, so this is just another whoa thing, if defined mechanically, must have mass equivalence. So that doesn't mean much. If it has mass equivalence, it must have materiality. In other words, the field that mitigates the charge between photons and electrons must be made up of discrete particles itself. So I won't go through his whole thing, but obviously he's implying that a field, a force, is making the photons bend, so that somehow you can bend photons with another force. Somehow you're bending photons with photons. You can't bend photons with photons. You can't bend photons with gravity. You can't bend photons with magnetism. You can't bend it. None of that stuff is true. So it would be stupid to say, okay, the photons are being bent by some field. No, the photons have to hit an electron to be bent. Photons go from point A to point B in a dead straight line unless they hit an electron. If they hit an electron, then they're going to go they might go somewhere else, because the electron has its own momentum, and it's going to impose on the photon a change in its direction. So anyway, so he's basically saying the interior little impediment is creating a woo-woo force. Okay, there's a woo force coming out of the impediment, woo, 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 and the woo force is telling the photons where to go. So the photons aren't getting broken into pieces, being reconstructed. They're just being told by a woo vibration where to go. Now, that's fine, but that's not going to explain the double slit pattern. So he didn't show the double slit pattern. He showed, this drawing isn't the classic double slit pattern. It obviously doesn't have the two patterns built into it. There's no evidence of the two patterns here. So the real double slit pattern is the complex pattern that has dots inside of the dot, so to speak. And that's not going to be explained by any field I create in between the slits. It just won't explain how a photon is just bent. You can't bend it twice. So it's not going to give you an explanation for both the patterns. You really have to combine. You really have to understand that you're combining pieces from the different sources. You're adding pieces. And the point is you're just saying, are they in phase or out of phase? In phase, out of phase. But they're pieces. You have to understand them as pieces. They're not whole photons. The pieces theory is the only one that really works. So anyway, so his explanation isn't even the pilot wave theory, which is even funnier, right? So this all started with me pointing out how blah, 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 and then it goes to a paper where he's saying Veritasium has stolen his pilot wave theory in some way, but he's a Jew, so it doesn't count. And then, but his theory isn't the pilot wave theory. So anyway, blah 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 blah. So enough of that. There was just nothing. I mean, if it was more interesting, I'd say, okay, let's go through all this crap. But he's just basically saying there's a field being produced by the surfaces, and the field produced by the surfaces is bending the photons. So I would argue you can't really, there's just no field that bends photons, so it's just not going to work. It's better than theirs, but it's not going to work. He calls it the B photons. B photons are coming out. B photons, whatever B photons are. And they're interacting with the regular photons in some kind of way. So anyway, all right, enough of that. Yes, enough. It's a lot of stuff. Yesterday's video hasn't hit 200 yet, so I don't know when I'm posting this, but I'll be posting it eventually. So till the next time and such, this has been a DraftScience video presentation.